Do you find yourself drifting sideways when you walk across a flat parking lot? Not on ice, not on gravel, not on an uneven sidewalk, on a perfectly flat, perfectly level surface? Do you reach for the wall when you stand up too fast? Do you feel like your body just slightly hesitates before it decides which direction it's actually going? If any of that sounds familiar, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now and watch this entire video, because what I'm about to share with you is not general wellness advice. This is clinical information that could genuinely change the trajectory of your health. And in some cases, it has been the difference between catching a serious problem early and missing it entirely until it becomes a crisis. Most people who experience this kind of instability hear the same thing from their doctor. Watch your step, take it slow, maybe try some balance exercises, maybe it's just age. And they go home, they try a few things, nothing changes, and they quietly accept that this is just what getting older feels like. I am here to tell you that acceptance is a mistake, not because I want to frighten you, but because the underlying mechanism behind what you are experiencing is something that responds extremely well to targeted intervention. And most people never receive that intervention because nobody ever explains to them what is actually happening inside their body. My name is Dr. Mandell. I have spent over 2 decades in clinical practice working with patients across a wide range of neurological and musculoskeletal conditions. And in that time, I have seen one particular pattern repeat itself so consistently that I can almost predict the full symptom profile of a new patient before they finish describing their first complaint. They come in talking about balance. They leave understanding that what they thought was a leg problem or an inner ear problem or simply an aging problem is actually a brain circulation problem. And that distinction changes everything about how you address it. Before I explain the mechanism, I want to paint you a picture. Imagine 3 people standing in front of you, and all 3 of them cannot walk in a straight line. The first is a stroke survivor just discharged from a hospital in Atlanta. The second is a guy at a 4th of July backyard party who has had one too many beers and is trying to convince everyone he is perfectly fine. The third is a 14-month-old girl in Cincinnati who is pulling herself up on the edge of the couch and taking her very first steps across the living room floor. All 3 of them wobble. All 3 of them drift and stumble and reach for support. But if you put any experienced clinician in that room, they would give you 3 completely different explanations. 3 completely different mechanisms. 3 completely different treatment approaches because the cause in each case is entirely different. That distinction is not a minor technicality. That distinction is the entire point. Here is the mistake I see repeated constantly, not just by patients, but sometimes by practitioners who should know better. Someone starts stumbling. They start drifting when they walk. Their first instinct, completely understandable, is to assume their legs are the problem. So they start doing squats. They buy calcium supplements and magnesium tablets. They look up balance exercises on YouTube. They maybe see a physical therapist who works on their hip flexors and their ankle stability. And months go by and nothing meaningfully changes. The stumbling continues. The drifting continues because they have been treating the wrong system entirely. Your legs are not running the show. Your legs are extraordinary mechanical structures, the product of millions of years of evolutionary engineering, but they are hardware. And hardware, no matter how sophisticated, does not know what to do without a command center telling it exactly what to do, when to do it, and how hard to do it. That command center is your brain, and more specifically for the purpose of balance and spatial coordination, it is a structure at the base of your skull called the cerebellum. Now, I want to tell you something about walking that most people have genuinely never considered. Walking is not a stable activity. It is not a smooth, controlled, mechanically secure process. Walking at its most fundamental biomechanical level is a controlled fall. That is not a colorful metaphor. That is the literal description of what happens every single time you take a step. When you push off with one foot and shift your weight forward, your center of mass moves ahead of your base of support. For a fraction of a second, you are in free fall. You are tipping forward with nothing underneath you. And in that precise window of time, your other leg swings forward automatically to catch you before you hit the ground. Every step, every single step you take is that sequence repeating itself, a fall and a catch. The timing of that catch is everything. If it is off by even a fraction, you stumble. If it is consistently slightly off, you drift. If it degrades enough, you fall. and the structure responsible for managing that timing with millisecond precision is the cerebellum. Every fraction of a second, the cerebellum is receiving data streams from your muscles, your joints, your inner ear, and your visual system. It is processing all of that simultaneously and issuing micro-corrections to keep your body balanced and your direction straight. When it is operating at full capacity, you walk down the hallway without thinking about it. When it starts operating at diminished capacity, your body starts sending you signals. And if you know how to read those signals, you can catch this early. Here's the number I always share with my patients because it genuinely reframes how people think about the brain. Your brain accounts for roughly 2% of your total body weight, 2%, but it consumes approximately 20% of all the oxygen you breathe, 20% of your entire oxygen supply going to 2% of your mass. The brain is the most metabolically expensive organ in your body, and it is extraordinarily, almost ruthlessly sensitive to any reduction in that oxygen supply. You do not need a major blockage for things to start going wrong. A modest chronic reduction in blood flow, sustained over months, sustained over years, is enough to degrade function in measurable ways. And the cerebellum, because of where it sits and how it is supplied, is particularly vulnerable to exactly this kind of slow, quiet reduction. I need to pause here and talk about something that I find clinically significant because it keeps coming up in my practice. Patients who come to me with balance complaints almost universally have other symptoms that they have never connected to the balance issue, symptoms they have been dismissing or attributing to stress or poor sleep or just getting older. And when I lay them all out together, the picture becomes unmistakable. The first symptom is short-term memory difficulty. You walk from the living room to the kitchen, and by the time you get there, the reason you went is completely gone. Not vague, not fuzzy, gone. You start a sentence with a clear thought in your head, and somewhere in the middle of it, the word you need simply is not there. But here is what I find fascinating. Ask that same person what they did on a specific Tuesday afternoon 20 years ago, and they can tell you in remarkable detail. That asymmetry is not random. Short-term memory formation requires active, real-time, high-energy delivery to specific brain regions. It is the first cognitive function to degrade when cerebral blood flow is chronically reduced. It is your brain's early warning system. The second symptom is mental fatigue that arrives on a schedule. People describe getting to 2 o'clock or 2:30 in the afternoon and feeling like someone pulled the plug. The work that felt manageable in the morning now feels like they are moving through resistance. Concentration fragments, tasks that should take 20 minutes stretch to 45. And the frustrating part is that they have slept. They are not running on 4 hours a night. They wake up reasonably rested, and they still hit that wall every single afternoon. That is not a sleep problem. That is an energy delivery problem in the brain. The third symptom is what my patients consistently describe as brain fog. And I want to be careful here because brain fog is one of those terms that has gotten vague from overuse. What my patients mean specifically is a half-second delay in processing, a slight thickness between a thought and its completion. One woman described it to me as trying to read a book through a foggy windshield. The words are there. The meaning is technically accessible, but everything requires just slightly more effort than it should. If you have been experiencing that sensation and attributing it to stress or age, I want you to reconsider that attribution. Let me tell you about a patient I will call Robert. He came to see me about 18 months ago. He was 64 years old, recently retired, and had spent 32 years working as a civil engineer outside of Denver. He was sharp, he was methodical, he was the kind of man who had tracked his blood pressure every morning for a decade. He came to me because he had started drifting to the left when he walked. Not dramatically, not enough that strangers noticed, but enough that he noticed, and he was unsettled by it. His primary care physician had ordered an MRI, found nothing acute, and told him to follow up in 6 months. When I sat with Robert and went through his full history, what came out was this. For the past year and a half, he had been struggling to retrieve proper nouns, names of people he knew well, names of places he had been dozens of times. He was hitting the afternoon fatigue wall around 2 p.m. consistently. And he had stopped volunteering to drive at night because something about tracking multiple moving objects had become subtly harder than it used to be. He had not mentioned any of this to his doctor because none of it seemed connected to his walking. He thought they were separate problems accumulating with age. They were not separate problems. They were one problem expressing itself through multiple channels. The vertebral artery supply to his cerebellum and posterior brain was being chronically compressed by a mechanical restriction at the upper cervical spine. His cerebellum was not diseased, it was not degenerating, it was being starved. We addressed the mechanical restriction systematically over 8 weeks, and we added the coordination protocol I am going to walk you through today. At the 10-week mark, Robert told me that the leftward drift was gone. His wife had commented independently that he seemed sharper in conversation. The afternoon wall had moved from 2 p.m. to closer to 5. He told me it felt like someone had gradually been turning up the resolution on a television he had gotten used to watching slightly blurry. That is the restoration of cerebral blood flow described by someone who experienced it firsthand. So let's talk about the anatomy, because this is where everything makes sense, and I want you to understand this clearly. 2 arteries are responsible for supplying blood to the posterior portion of your brain. They are called the vertebral arteries. And what makes these arteries anatomically unique, unlike virtually any other major artery in your body, is that they do not simply run alongside the cervical spine. They run through it. Each cervical vertebra has a small opening on either side called the foramen transversarium, and the vertebral arteries travel through these openings one vertebra at a time, ascending through your neck like a wire running through a series of rings. When they reach the top of the cervical spine, they wrap around the atlas, which is the first vertebra, the one that your skull actually rests on, and they enter the base of the skull. Once inside, the 2 vertebral arteries converge into a single larger vessel called the basilar artery. And the basilar artery is the primary blood supply for the cerebellum, the brain stem, and the entire posterior cerebral region responsible for coordination, balance, processing speed, and spatial awareness. This entire system is called the vertebrobasilar circulation, and it is the most structurally vulnerable major circulation in the human body. Think carefully about what this means. The artery feeding your balance center is literally threaded through your bones. It is not protected by soft tissue. It is routed through a series of bony channels that are directly affected by the alignment, the mobility, and the muscular tension of your cervical spine. If those vertebrae are even slightly misaligned, if the surrounding muscles are in chronic spasm from years of desk work or forward head posture or old whiplash injuries that were never properly resolved, that artery gets compressed. It gets kinked. Not catastrophically, not enough to cause an immediate stroke, but enough to reduce the internal diameter of the vessel persistently. Enough to reduce the volume of blood reaching the cerebellum by a meaningful margin day after day, month after month, year after year. That is the mechanism. That slow, quiet, chronic reduction is what produces every symptom I have described. And this brings me to something I need you to understand about where the real restriction lives. Because most people who try to stretch their neck are stretching the wrong part. When people feel tension in the neck and decide to do something about it, they typically tilt the head forward or drag one ear toward the shoulder. The stretch they feel is in the middle of the cervical spine around the 5th and 6th vertebrae. That region is already the most mobile segment of the cervical spine. It bears the most load. Pushing additional mobility into it is not helpful. In some cases, it creates new problems. The restrictions that actually matter for vertebrobasilar circulation live in 2 specific zones. The first is the cervicothoracic junction, the transition zone between the bottom of the neck and the top of the thoracic spine. This is the area where many Americans develop what is colloquially called a dowager's hump. I want to be direct about this. That rounded prominence at the base of the neck is not primarily a fat deposit, and it is not simply cosmetic. It is a chronic mechanical blockage. It represents years of accumulated joint stiffness and postural compensation, and it directly affects the path of the vertebral arteries ascending through that region. The second critical zone is the upper cervical spine, specifically C1 and C2, the uppermost 2 vertebrae where the vertebral arteries make their final turn before entering the skull. This is where compression has the most direct impact on posterior brain circulation. We're going to work through 2 blocks of exercises today. Block 1 is focused on releasing the mechanical restriction in the neck and restoring alignment. Block 2 is focused on directly training the cerebellum through coordinated movement challenges. For the first exercise in Block 1, I need you to locate your 7th cervical vertebra. Here is how. Drop your chin gently towards your chest and run one finger slowly down the back of your neck toward its base. you will encounter a bony prominence that protrudes noticeably more than its neighbors. That is C7, referred to in anatomy as the vertebra prominence. Place the pad of your finger against the side of that spinous process. Now begin slowly rotating your head to the right. As you rotate, apply a firm but gentle pressure with your finger in the same direction, assisting the vertebra through its range of motion. What you should feel is a mild elastic resistance, the sensation of pressing against a taut rubber band. That resistance is the joint capsule and the ligaments reaching their physiological end range. That is your stopping point. Do not force past it. As you return your head to center, maintain the finger pressure for an additional 2 to 3 seconds before releasing. That sustained hold at end range creates a prolonged stretch in the joint capsule, and that is where the mechanical benefit accumulates. Repeat this on the left side, then move your finger one vertebra lower and repeat the entire sequence. The second exercise in Block 1 addresses the muscular component of vertebral artery compression. When the sternocleidomastoid muscle, the large diagonal muscle running from behind your ear down to your collarbone, remains in a state of chronic contraction, it generates sustained pressure on the structures running through and alongside the cervical spine. To release it, place one hand flat against your collarbone on one side and press firmly downward, anchoring the soft tissue. Now slowly, without any sudden movement, tilt your head toward the opposite shoulder and lift your chin upward at a slight angle. You will feel a deep, clear stretch running along the lateral aspect of your neck. Hold that stretch for 20 to 30 seconds, breathing steadily through it, and return slowly. Repeat on the other side. Follow this with 2 minutes of deep circular self-massage along both sides of the cervical spine, working from the base of the skull down to the base of the neck with firm, deliberate pressure from your fingertips. Now, Block 2. The cerebellum is a trainable system. This is one of the most important things I can tell you because so many people assume that what they have lost to age or disuse is simply gone. It is not. Through a process called neuroplasticity, the brain continuously strengthens the neural pathways that are consistently activated and challenged. The cerebellum is particularly responsive to this kind of targeted training. The key is to challenge it at or just beyond its current capacity consistently every day. The first exercise is a pelvic rotation with independent limb coordination. Stand with your feet at shoulder width. Begin rotating your hips in a slow, deliberate circle. As you do that, allow one leg to step out in a circular pattern that follows the hip rotation. Now, while that is happening, begin alternating right and left hand tapping movements with a rhythm that is entirely independent of your lower body movement. What you now have is 3 simultaneous movement patterns running on different timing sequences. Your hips moving in one rhythm, your stepping leg moving in a related but distinct pattern, and your hands moving on a completely separate beat. This will feel awkward. It may feel impossible for the first few attempts. That awkwardness is not failure. That awkwardness is your cerebellum operating right at the boundary of its current neural wiring. Each day you practice this, that boundary expands. Within a week, most of my patients report that it begins to feel smoother. That smoothness is a measurable neurological change happening in real time. The second exercise is a fixed point turn, a technique borrowed directly from classical dance training and used by neurologists as a vestibular rehabilitation tool. Stand facing a wall and fix your gaze on a specific point, a light switch, a mark on the paint, anything at roughly eye level. Now take 3 steps and execute a complete 360-degree turn. The instruction is this: as you rotate, keep your eyes locked on that fixed point for as long as physically possible during the turn. And the moment the turn is complete, find that point again immediately. What this exercise trains is the coordination between your vestibular system and your visual system during rotational movement. It is one of the most targeted and effective anti-dizziness protocols available. And the reason it works is that it forces the cerebellum to stabilize conflicting sensory inputs under controlled conditions, which is precisely the skill that erodes when posterior circulation is compromised. I want to say something before we finish, and I want to say it plainly. The American healthcare system is structured around the management of chronic conditions, not the resolution of them. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is a business model. A patient who understands the mechanism behind their symptoms, who makes targeted interventions, who gets better and stops needing appointments, that patient is not a revenue stream. I am not interested in being part of that cycle. This channel exists because I believe that when people understand what is actually happening inside their own bodies, they make better decisions, they take more effective action, and they get better outcomes. If you stumble when you walk, if you drift, if you grab walls and countertops, the problem is the blood supply reaching your cerebellum. The most common mechanical cause of that compromised supply is cervical spine restriction compressing the vertebral arteries. The solution is to release that restriction and systematically train the system that depends on it. Do these exercises consistently, not once, not when you remember. Every day I want to hear from you. Leave your age in the comments below. I read every single one. It tells me who this information is reaching, and it helps me build future videos around the specific needs of this audience. If this changed how you understand what your body has been trying to tell you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that like button. We are building something here, a community of people who refuse to accept a slow decline as inevitable. Every subscriber brings us closer to the people who need this most. I am Dr. Mandell. The body is more capable of restoring itself than most people are ever told. Give it the right input, stay consistent, and I will see you in the next video.